Hello everybody and welcome to an Anthurium evening hosted by Grow Topicals featuring the one and only Doc Block. Quick introduction of this lovely gentleman here. So you might know him from the internet as Doc Block, but Dr. Jeffrey Block is genuinely one of the most fascinating people in the plant world. By day, he's a board-certified anesthesiologist and professor at the University of Miami's Miller School of Medicine, but his real obsession, plants. As an ethnobotanist and founder of Block Botanical Gardens, Doc Block has spent decades cultivating what he's described as the art and science of nurturing nature, growing some of the most extraordinarily tropical specimens you'll find anywhere in the world. He's also an anthurium breeder, as you probably know if you're here tonight, and one of his cultivars, the Anthurium Doc Block Michelle, is currently a finalist for the RHS Plant of the Year. So, for those of you deep in the Anthurium rabbit hole, which you're exactly in the right place, we're really lucky to have Dr. Jeffrey Block.
Okay. Thanks, Emma and Jacob with Grow Tropicals. The name Doc Block has nothing to do with plants. It has to do because in anesthesiology, I stayed and I did a fellowship training year in pain management, which is very frequently we call regional anesthesia. Epidurals for childbirth were starting to become popular, and so my skill set was trying to see or envision what's beyond a certain place for anatomical references. So my partners, if they knew that somebody had something that could help with a certain type of nerve block, they'd say, go see Doc Block, and it stuck. So it has nothing to do with plants, just so you get the idea. But the background of healthcare, medicine, and agricultural healthcare, they very much are the same. Some of the slides I'll share with you are those aha moments for me, which brought to light the fact that we're not that different than plants, you'll see. And what it really involves is more of an understanding of what plants are trying to tell you, rather than a rote formula that you have that says, I have to water it this many times, give it this much light and humidity. No, I think by the time we finish tonight, you'll have a very different understanding when we flip that scenario around and talk about how the plants are engaging you with you unwittingly doing what you're doing to try to sustain them. So to begin with, again, there's some slides here. I apologize. That actually wasn't too bad for audio, was it? No, it's not. As we heard. And it's a small room, so I want to keep it intimate. And if you want, we'll have time for some questions and answers. I like the hard questions. And you got any you want to start with?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we could start with the most difficult question. How do you feel about not winning the RHS Plant of the Year today?
And that's not a difficult answer. I feel great about it because, number one, like I said, it gave me a chance after many, many years of coming back here. But maybe more important is that I never wanted, and my parents, I was growing up with sports as a kid. Tennis and basketball and everything. And every little kid wants to be the world's best in something. And my parents taught me, don't try to be the world's best, but to be able to compete favorably with the best in the world, that's really the goal here. And I did so at this show, not because I entered it. I give full credit to Grow Tropicals. I met Jacob several months ago, and he saw an opportunity to have it there. I can't even say competing with, because if you see the show or if you've seen it, it's either going to be regarded compared to the traditional way plants are judged for this show as being, outdoor plants, lots of flowers, colors, different forms. It's almost like the ugly duckling if you're looking at the show plants up there, or is it really a swan? And so,
I mean, it's the swan in our eyes.
I get it. It is in mine too. So let me go through a couple slides here, maybe take the next 10, at most 15 minutes. We'll do some more questions and answers. And then if you're still wanting to get there, you need to stretch your legs, fine. But then I'd like to be able to include in tonight a little understanding that I'd like to share with you of how the plants are engaging you, not the other way around. So that's a picture we did several years ago. A good friend of ours who I trust to do these kind of pictures said, let's get a group picture with you and just the anthuriums. I don't normally have them all in this location, but I pulled them together because I wanted to show the variety of things with only the velvet-leafed anthuriums. Now there's anthura, which are the flowering types of anthuriums, the ones with the colorful, flower that comes up. But these are the ones that fascinated me for far longer, because about 40 to 50 years ago, everything was green and some had silver stripes, but there were no colors in them. So as full credit to, again, what these are otherwise known as velvet-leafed anthuriums, because when they're grown using nice clean water, there's a reflective quality of the leaf sheen that almost looks velvety. So green velvet is all there were, and sometimes some with the veins on them. But I got a hold of things that I found that had a little hint of pink, maybe in the newest leaf coming out. You just reinforce breeding, choosing for more and more red rather than pink, or lavender for a different one, which evolved to Michelle, that you select for violet and purples. And so over generations, you get to see that. Now, generation for breeding used to be, when I started, about 5 years from a concept plant to an actual plant that you could say, oh, this is the result of the hybrid. And remember, every one of those are hybrids, as are each of you. But keep that in mind, because we're going to give context to that. But over those years then, there were two things that are being selected for. One are different color forms. But I'm selecting for vigor. Life's too short for me to wait for the runts of a litter finally to germinate, to wait and see what's going on. So when you selectively breed, not only for what you want it to look like, called phenotype, but for the actual vigor of the plant, I think the success today is that it no longer takes 5 years to do that. It's 2 to 3 years. And at that point, it's something that people realize that the vigor is what makes these plants now much easier to grow than when I started with them. So thank you for growing them, but that's the other important part that people don't think. They just think visually. There's more to it. So Michelle was the first plant there. I named it after my wife for the obvious reason. It gives me a lot of time off in the greenhouses that she doesn't come and chase me down. But there's been other plants that have had her name on it. There's a Ludicea orchid called Michelle's Jewel. And that
Did you name that one as well?
Yeah. That's from about 10 years ago. That was an American Orchid Society honor. When you score a certain point in competition, and I do like competitive shows, which is why I like coming here, they allow you in the American Orchid Society at a certain level to award a clonal name to that Ludicea. And Michelle's Jewel was cheaper than real jewelry. But this is how you respect and honor the people who are important to you. I just showed you a lot of names on those plants, and that was from at least 5 years ago when people were first starting to say, oh, I like this, I like that. What do we call this? What do we call that? And part of it's the imagination, but here's a little tip. I've had people come by my place and they want to look at my home as a botanical garden. And it sort of is. I've been there 36 years, so there are things sustained there that are larger and maybe of better quality as survivors because they're nurtured for all those years. Well, I had tour groups come by who were looking at some flowering trees, and they asked me the name of one of these trees, and I quite dutifully told them the name. I remembered it. But all of you, if you put your plant tags and things, you'll realize that plant tags get lost. Or what about the taxonomists? They'll change the name of an entire genus and put it someplace else. What's a poor grower supposed to do with names? So this particular group that came by and asked me the name of the plant got into, and this was at least 10 years ago, so it might have even been Facebook, got into this contentious debate. Oh, Dr. Block didn't know the name of this was really that. Has anybody ever here met a plant that cared what the hell you call it? Other than late to dinner? That's my point. It doesn't matter. We've been trying to get names assigned to plants, whether for research. Now that you have the Human Genome Project followed 3 years later in 2003 with the first plant genome, Arabidopsis, a little thing called mousecress. There's a genetic map that you can have, and the names are almost meaningless. And that's why they don't ask in a paternity suit, what's the name of your daddy? They say, give me the evidence by the genetics and we'll prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So keeping up with the plant science and healthcare science has been really helpful for me for my whole career. And I'll show you a few things as we go along that'll bring that to light. This actually is, speaking of botanical gardens, not my place, but I live about 15 minutes from Miami or the United States' foremost tropical botanical garden. And I say the continental United States, there's some wonderful places in Hawaii. But on the right there is a place I wanted my plants to be seen to have more of a global outreach. I'll go to Kew on Thursday. I don't know if they're interested in things that are hybrids, but I am in several different botanical gardens throughout the world, including, I don't know if has anybody ever been in Gardens by the Bay, Singapore? Yeah, isn't that extraordinary? So when that design was being discussed about 12 years ago, the first CEO of there came to Miami at Fairchild Garden, gave a talk and showed these magnificent structures for an artificial cloud forest. And I knew that I liked anthuriums, but what was nice about Singapore is also at the equator, which is where in Colombia, South America, these plants are native to. And the thing is, they didn't know what they looked like over there because they really hadn't seen many. So the garden directors agreed that I could send them a bunch. It was a donation. This is a collegial garden-to-garden donation. It's not a sale, and it wasn't through Anthuriums by Doc Block, nothing. It was from Block Botanical Gardens. That gift allowed people on the other side of the world to see something that is not from where they are. They hadn't been seen in China and Asia before. So if you think about it, and I remember the first plants I saw in Miami that might have come from Thailand, but many, many years ago, I always regarded them as being more special because they were exotic. They didn't come, they weren't familiar. I think that's what's going on here now in the UK. I think that now that you see some tropical aeroids, in particular maybe these anthuriums, it's because they're not native to here and they're seen sort of for the first time. That collectors such as yourselves are like, let me at it, okay? There's some warnings to that we'll talk about in Europe, but hundreds of years ago that I'll get to with a slide. But in this case, about 2.5 years ago, if you noticed at the end of that introduction, there was a picture of me with 2 talks I gave in March of 2024 in Thailand. And I went from there to Gardens by the Bay, arranged for the donation. And a year later, which was last year, this on the right was filmed.
Dr. Block Anthuriums, donated to the Gardens by the Bay, 2024. Now it's 2025, June. Anthuriums are growing very nicely in the club forest.
So these can grow in many different places throughout the world. It's just putting in a habitat that would be approximating where they come from. And that's key for you growing any plants you want to grow. I don't care where they come from. You got to look up where they're native to, and then you'll get the best idea for where nature intended them. So this is where I live, but this is from 1926, exactly 100 years ago. It was previously an avocado and mango grove for only 10 years. Then what they called the Florida land boom happened. Everything became residential. So my home site's really directly behind this sign. But if you want to see something about how little history Miami has as a municipality, it was first incorporated in 1896. So my hotel room's older than that today here. So, but it gives you the idea. And this, of course, was when the land boom hit. Twice as nice as paradise, mango and avocado trees. The thing I want to show you there is look at the phone number. 4 digits, okay? There weren't many people there, and it's only 100 years ago. A few months after this picture was taken of this sign was the Great Miami Hurricane that wiped Miami out until the mid-1950s. So at least in a tropical environment, sometimes it's easy come, easy go, but things grow back fast. This is the backyard. This is our backyard. And so we've given tours for years. This is probably 15 years ago. And more people are able to see things, which we love sharing. It's not really a public garden like Kew. I don't have volunteers and gift shops and tram rides. But it's a way that we can share what we have. And this is long before I ever thought of anybody being interested in an anthurium. But something very interesting happened about 5 years ago. And you were all here, you all went through it, and it was COVID. And what did COVID do? COVID meant that you couldn't go to maybe a nursing home and hug your grandparents, or social distancing presented really a big dilemma. And again, as an ethnobotanist physician, I'm telling you, that is decidedly not instinctual to mammals. We're all mammals. And we're different than other animals such as fish, amphibians, reptiles, certainly birds. Mammals need to touch. You take that not ability to touch your fellow mammal and you look for something to substitute. We're hardwired to want to nurture living things. So 2 industries with COVID went through the roof, plants and pets. Anybody have a new pet since then? We do, okay? And plants? Everybody's, yeah, okay. So my point is, that when you look at healthcare and COVID, it wasn't simply a bad virus or things like that. It made us do different things that revealed what we really are looking for as far as our own instinctual needs as mammals. This is what I've done pretty much my whole life. This is many years ago. So I'm an anesthesiologist. I pass gas for a living, okay? But as a young doc, I started with bromeliads because they were native in South Florida. They were these cool things that grew up in trees. And even the anthuriums we're talking about today are at least what they call semi-epiphytic. They grow up. They're not going to stay in water. They're not creeping along the ground. They will grow up and around things. So understanding that that's its preference, putting them in a place where they can do it, indoors or out, they'll be much more likely to thrive. And so these are still more bromeliads, and even bromeliads are like these anthuriums from the New World. Bromeliads are from Central America, South America, and including some of the southern states in the U.S. So when they're introduced here, and not just so here, but in particular in areas in Asia, such as China, which has been closed off from other areas, they're regarded as being, wow, tropical, exotic, the other side of the world. Watch for bromeliads making a real big push into Asian markets in the future. So it's my workbench. It's where I sit, and I told you I get time, away from Michelle. So these are some of the things we grow, and it's a nice environment to where we're in. Miami is a different kind of a climate. It's wet season and dry season. We don't have the typical winter that you have here, nor the summer, but it's hot and wet in the summer, and it's cooler and dry in the winter, which is why everybody comes and visits in the wintertime. This is other stuff that I've done academically. I have written books since COVID again. COVID does a lot of things. It gives you free time to start to think and do stuff. So I've actually written 4 chapters in 3 different medical textbooks on plants and health and wellness. And actually, this is something else. It was an honor from 10 years ago. I've been the president of our medical school's alumni association. In that capacity, I'm honored to give the oath of medicine to 200 new doctors at commencement. That's kind of cool because they look to me for different things, and most of them at this event have no idea I know about plants. Nevertheless, hence the quote from Hippocrates there about nature itself is the best medicine, Hippocrates being one who's credited with the oath that all physicians take when they embark on their new careers. Let me show you why I show this. This is the way that the information gets passed along. And even before all the books and all the current ways you think about learning of things, things about plants and health and wellness would have been passed generationally, from father to child, from grandmother to daughter. It's a generational wisdom. Because without that, how are you going to know if this little red berry on a plant is either healthy for you or it'll kill you? Okay, so part of the way that traditionally all of this knowledge was shared was not in a room with a projector. It was doing things like you'd see there. This is an aha moment for me. When I was in university, Emory University in Atlanta back in the day, early 19 to mid 1970s, had a very good chemistry department. So they showed in our chemistry department a picture of what's on the left there. It says magnesium in the middle, but that's a molecule, all those little atoms there, of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the way the plants get their energy. It's what sustains plants, and it's key to understanding plants if you're going to do it at a molecular level. Well, a few years later, I go to medical school, and in hematology, they showed us a picture of hemoglobin, blood, what we have that allows us, in this case, to carry oxygen, but in essence, it's the same exact molecule with only one difference, and that's what's in the middle there. The same way that a physician will give a pregnant woman or anybody with anemia extra iron, doesn't upset the chemistry or the balance of the person. They'll do that to ensure that hemoglobin is functioning at its full capacity, or if you can't deliver your blood around, you're not going to get oxygen around, you'll die, or at least get sick and not feel well. Same thing with the way a farmer would deal with plants in offering magnesium. If there's a cold threat coming along or something else that's harming plants, any good farmer will know that you have to optimize not just food, but one particular element of it, which is magnesium. So the fact that those are biochemically so closely related was remarkable for me. That's the aha moment, how closely we're related to plants. And if we want to talk about it even to a different level, there's 3 basic kingdoms of living things. I'm not talking individual cells, but you have plants, animals, and fungi. Surprise, we're actually biochemically a little closer related to fungi than plants. And if you don't think there's a lot of future in this discovery of things for healthcare purposes, the reason that plants develop those chemicals in their arsenal is because they have to. They're existentially rooted. We'll go into that later in the talk. But because of that, they have to engage their surroundings. And if you have plants then that you know are going to engage their surroundings, oops, well, there's one. Okay, nope, and nobody step on it. Pick it up. You'll realize that the evolution of plants and animals and fungi are all interdependent. I put this slide there for whoever might be geeky enough to want to know about water and chemistry. We can talk about water in another time, but suffice it to say that there's a clear reason why we're exploring the cosmos looking for water. It's the way we understand life here. There may be other ways it develops elsewhere in the universe, but because water is so important to not only people but plants, I wanted to show you this because this talks about water not in terms of being clean or dirty. It talks about it in terms of its chemistry, which is actually how acidic or basic it is. Remember from chemistry class, 7 is neutral, and then if you go higher numbers, that's called alkaline. Alkaline tastes a little sweet, by the way, and this is a little side note. When you taste water that's been alkalinized, the stuff you'll buy in the supermarket in the bottle, frequently it'll say alkalized, or it'll say a pH of 8, 9, somewhere in there. It's perceived as being a little sweet. If it was acidic, it's perceived as being a little sour. It's not as nice tasting-wise. So something I want you to know about Miami, where I come from, we live on a coral rock bed, meaning it used to be an old coral reef, and then the water goes through the coral. It's the reservoirs or the cisterns are underneath where we can pull up a lot of good fresh water, but it's got a lot of the calcium that's in coral rock, calcium carbonate, it's chalk. And so if we used only that, those chalk deposits are there. Miami, though, as a name, it's an indigenous people's name, it means sweet water because our water is alkaline. And so by giving it that higher pH, it gives it that sweeter taste. The name Miami really means sweet water. How? You see the little triangle on top? I've put it around 6.5. And the reason that I did is people say, wow, is pH important to the health of a plant? And the fact is, it is. But here's why. There are more of not only the basic elements that you would use for food, but even the micronutrients that are available at that pH of 6.5. If you follow the different lines down at 6.5, everybody thinks of the basic foods of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, to a lesser extent sulfur and calcium. But look, there's magnesium. If you go much lower, you're going to lose the magnesium on that middle line, and iron's just the opposite. So the sweet spot for most water for most plants, and that particular pH it's called that makes those particular elements bioavailable to plants, happens at a pH between 6 and 6.5. It may be a little geeky for you to want to see it there, but to understand water is not just to say, oh, we're going to make the plant wet. We're going to look at what natural rainfall might normally do. But remember, when you deliver water to the top of your plant, those people growing, that's what you're delivering from the top. If you really want to know what the pH that's coming out is, you catch the water at the bottom and then test that. That'll tell you what the roots were exposed to, because the foliage isn't really where the money's happening for chemical exchange. It's generally down in the roots. So look at pH sometimes a little more critically if you're trying to really tweak what you're doing for the plant. And certainly the bottled water with the alkalinity there, if you look at the numbers in the bottled water getting up to the 8, 8.5, even 9.5 range, look what happens to things like manganese and iron and those other nutrients there, even nitrogen when it gets very low, very high, the pH. The nitrogen's not as immediately available. This is a very revealing chart, and newsflash, that data is from 1948. Okay, before I was born. So doing your research of the basic sciences might help a little bit this way too. This is another picture of just one of my greenhouses showing lots of different varieties of things. And we'll move right along because I want to talk a moment about the biochemical power of plants. And this slide from Michael Pollan, who's an excellent author, did something called The Botany of Desire years ago. He says about plants, they nourish us and poison us. They delight our senses of sight, smell, and taste. They calm our nerves or wake us up. And they even change the content of our minds and the experience of our consciousness. That's powerful stuff. This is the way plants are engaging us. And when you think about that last phrase, I'll show this slide sometimes at home, and the people who see it know that I'm a physician, an anesthesiologist, that I should know something about consciousness and things like that. So they asked me something very relevant, and if you saw in the books that I've been authoring in the last several years, the middle book was called Cannabis, Chemistry and Biology Fundamentals. So people have asked me when I'm giving talks, they say, okay, Doc, what does it really mean then to be stoned? And because that's what's talking about at the end, change the content of our minds, plant chemicals that can do that. And I can't bullshit my answer there. I have to tell them, look, we don't really understand the miracle of consciousness. So how can I describe a change of consciousness? Leave that to the poets like Pollan here. Isn't that a great name for an author? Yeah. Spells it with an A, but he's forgiven. So what I have is, I have a little talk that I can give, and I put this at the end of those slides that I just wanted to share with you. And we can take an interlude if you want before I go into this next section. Is anybody getting anything out of this? Is it worthwhile you've been here to learn something? Or yeah? All right. Anybody? And somebody's going to have to break the ice with questions because she's got a whole card. She's got a lot there, and it doesn't have to be only these. But, you know, you can start. She gave me the hard one already about, you know, not winning. Life's not about winning. It's about staying in the game, relevant and competing with the world's best. And that I'm very pleased for being here. You want to break the ice with another question? Or
obviously you said your background's in medicine. Has that changed the way you approach plant care compared to a traditional horticulturalist?
Physicians are supposed to be and are excellent observers. Okay, so you're all being a plant doctor in essence when you're looking at your plant, right? So the plant's telling you stuff if you're a good observer, which is how a physician would normally get the earliest tip-off for either a treatment or a cure to stop a process, a disease, something like that. And so you're always observing. The fact is, though, some people start working with plants not really but by observing as much as reading a book who says, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do the other thing. And sometimes if you're just going to go from what the book says, but you're not really looking at the subject, person or plant, you miss the earliest tip-off. So as I wanted to develop really the line of questions from there, a thought is be a good observer and you'll understand plants better from the perspective of what we'll talk about is how the plants are engaging us. That's the title of the next section talk. Go ahead.
Should we not be using Cal Mag? Should we be using Cal and Mag separate?
The chemistry gets a little more complicated because there's magnesium sulfate versus magnesium citrate. You take magnesium citrate, you'll know the difference. Okay? Anybody ever had a colonoscopy before? Okay. So what I'm pointing out is the combinations of things that you may have affecting you is really not applicable the same way you might think to plants. It's the bioavailability of that calcium or magnesium to the plants, which is why I focused more on the pH. Because when you're giving a plant whatever the preparation of the magnesium or the calcium, it's things that the plant is really more concerned with the bioavailability to bring it in. So I don't think you can make the same correlations necessarily with the full chemical. These are salts. That's what calcium citrate or magnesium sulfate. They're the most familiar chemistry that you Brits actually were famous in developing pharmaceutically going back hundreds of years ago, including with specimens of cinchona bark over at Kew, brought from the New World in South America for curing your Thames River. Charles Dickens, malaria is all over the place here. Okay, but this is another good example of plants coming around the world, to help people, but understanding it more from a physician healer's perspective as well as a plantsman or woman's. So I hope that sort of gave you a non-answer to your question about people or what should I take for yourself. I can go back to that 1948 slide there, but again, the principal answer I'm going to try to direct you towards, it depends on your pH. Plants' pH are different than us, but to tell you how specific your pH in your blood right now is, we are all living in this room with our pH at about 7.4. We're all slightly alkaline. We like it that way, but if I made any of you 7.6 or 7.2, just a little higher or lower, you would be in the emergency room right now. That would be how badly you felt. Plants probably have more of a variety of tolerances to things, but I still am going to go back to the best advice I can give you. It all depends on the pH as far as what things there are. You're stuck at that 7.4. So the rules are different with people than plants in that respect. You're welcome. Anybody else? That was a pretty detailed science question. Hi.
Hi, thank you for updating a lot of us in the room probably. But she's struggling with some of your cultivars, especially the black.
Yeah, here's what I can suggest to that. I didn't, even though it was one of the pictured plants with the names on them, it said Black Widow when we did the zoom in and out. I didn't release Black Widow for years and years as Black Widow. I originally got almost all the plants I got as what they call no IDs or NOID, meaning somebody doesn't really know what they're from. I put the names there as much for a legal protection of it as anything else, but there are too many people putting names in plants quickly, and when you say the Indonesian version of this, that, or the other, The reason I didn't release Black Widow, and one of the things that makes it unique, Black Widow, for those of you that may not be as familiar, has a particular pattern of the veins which are really mostly the longitudinal veins with very little lateral bridging. And we gave it the name Black Widow, but I can tell you when my kids saw it, this was about 10 years ago, they said, oh, let's name that Spider-Man, because Marvel had just come out with the movies, and it does resemble, a little bit like a spider's image there. The reason I didn't release the Black Widow for quite a while is that when I was doing the crosses to try to get more of that parent plant, almost all the offshoot seedlings, even with a self-cross, were not coming out looking like that. And so I figured it has to be that it's a very recessive trait genetically. So only at a certain point to where I had enough of them coming out that looked a lot like the parent. Again, from seeds, they're all hybrids, and a hybrid from a seedling is going to reflect those genetics which are dominant versus recessive. It's the same reason that all of you in this room don't look exactly like your brother or your sister. But haven't you ever noticed that there's somebody in your family line that comes up that looks like a photograph of a great-great-grandparent, and you think they're a, doppelganger or something?
Reincarnation.
Right. So it's the same genetics that I'm describing in people with Black Widow, highly recessive, and for that reason, some of the first ones that were released may not have had the genetics in them that really did away with that recessive nature. The only way to do away with it would be to clone it. And, that can be done. It is being done all over the place. But the reality is working with Black Widow from its existing genetics, even a clone form, and you try to combine it with another one, doesn't mean that everything's going to come out looking just like the parent. But that's what makes this whole thing exciting, because sometimes they'll come out more beautiful. And so there were things I was trying to do. The fact is, the new leaf in it truly isn't black the way a Michelle leaf can get black. It's a little more on the darker brown. But nobody knows what a brown recluse is compared to a Black Widow, right? Yeah. It's still a spider. So I think the best answer I can give you, a much more recessive trait than they're probably used to with other hybrids.
Obviously, your gardens are in South Florida. Also, he gave me an amazing tour of his garden virtually the other day. It's outstanding. Highly recommend you go watch him on YouTube. You've done things with Only Plants as well, where you've shown your gardens. It's really cool. But that's obviously a very different climate to what most of us have in our UK living rooms. So what translates to indoors and what doesn't?
Environment.
Well, yeah.
No, I don't mean to be smug with that answer, but environment. Remember I said before that if you want to try to grow a plant, try to research where it comes from in the world and what the conditions are there. Does it get a minimum temperature that causes it to flower, that's a trigger in many orchids? Is it a certain amount of light? Because I know there were bromeliads that were brought into Miami years ago that came from the lower canopy of trees in Brazil, and they just look like a plain green something, but when exposed to full sun, they turned brilliant red and got the name Fireball for that reason. So the conditions you expose it to, whether they're exactly like they would be in their native environment versus what you're doing to it, does affect what's going to come out. So the fact is, when people are growing these plants the way that we're trying to popularize them as indoor house plants, and by the way, I don't have any plants inside my house.
You have one. You have a Michelle.
I have one because we bought it. I'll tell you why there's one Michelle indoors, and I showed it to you, Emma. I had given away thousands of plants of many different types for decades. And it wasn't until about 5 years ago when people were taking some gifts that I just gave them of something, and now I saw them selling them online for hundreds. Some crazy types of things. We got kids who were in high school and then needed to go to university. So I said, maybe I should find some other people who would like to grow my plants and sell them. By the way, I am in whatever business comes from it. I'm the developer, hybridizer, breeder. I don't like selling plants myself. I don't like, having to grow commercial numbers of them because I don't have enough space. So I stay in my lane and I rely on very diligent and honest growers and sellers. Why do I bring it up that way? Well, getting back to the gist of your question, I wanted to see if they could do well inside, because how many people live in South Florida like I do where you don't have to? So I always appreciated the anthuriums because I found that they did their best and looked their best a lot during our winter months, okay? When it's not 90 Fahrenheit, or 95 and 100% humidity. So I'm going to tell you that I'm a little metrically challenged here, but I'm going to give you two sets of numbers, and, well, they're same numbers, 60 and 80. 60 and 80 I like because they are the percent humidity that I'm generally finding that these anthuriums would enjoy, 60 to 80% humidity, and 60 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, it's like 15 to 27, I think. Not quite, 20.
So what my point is, those are conditions in which you'd be comfortable indoors. And these are plants which could be comfortable under the same kinds of conditions. To me, that's what makes the ideal houseplant, right? Not to where you have to worry about something fancy, and if you turn the heat off and your basement gets down to
how many of us have
freezing.
humidifiers here? Yes, some of us? Yeah, a chunk.
Well, that's not
you don't
so
have
bad.
to.
Well, you do and you don't, because the humidity, the reason I wanted to give you that 60 to 80% humidity range is because that's general living conditions. But when the temperature gets either extreme for too cold, which is going to be 50 or less, or too hot, which is generally 90 or more. Again, these are Fahrenheit.
We worry about the cold side, so 50 is 10.
Okay. If at that point you don't have adequate hydration, the plant does poorly. And in the extremes of heat, if the plant's not well hydrated, they'll also melt in front of you. So the idea is the extra humidity is not likely to hurt. Mm-hmm. It may make your walls a little damp. It may make mosses grow. But generally, a little extra humidity helps. The same way you would give your little child, if they got a little raspy thing, a vaporizer. What do you think that's doing? Same kind of thing in the room. Remember, that used to be, they still do that?
I don't know. I don't have kids.
Okay. Isn't that still done, especially in colder environments? Now, I was born and raised in New York, but not too different from this latitude. And yet at 14 years old, I moved to Miami with my parents, kicking and screaming. No 14-year-old wants to go move anywhere. They're just finding themselves. And I was into sports all year in different seasons. Going to Miami was a sentence for me. But I had a grandmother who was down there. She discovered Miami right after World War II, opened up the first flower shop in Miami Beach. So my parents wanted to go where it was warm in the winter. We would go down and visit Nana. And I can tell you, since it's not in the slide there, but again, this is sort of just a personal story on who taught me about plants, and it was that grandmother. So, and by the way, you saw the last plant in the thing with the names on it was Minerva. Her name was Minerva, and Roman goddess with wisdom and the arts and crafts. So that was Minerva. Minerva had something really cool. She had this little key, and it was the key to the city of Miami Beach. And they give that to dignitaries and stars. And so how she got it was actually kind of interesting. She moved down to Miami in 1948. My grandfather and her went different ways, and as a single woman, went down there and opened up Miami Beach's first flower shop. And then the boom came in the 1950s for Miami Beach. Miami Beach was developed in the 20s, but then the great Miami hurricane that I told you about wiped everything out. Then came the Second World War, a depression in the United States, then the war. It wasn't until the mid-50s that building started with some of the modern hotels, including air-conditioned ones. I don't know if anybody's been to Miami Beach or knows of a hotel called the Fontainebleau. But the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach was the first modern architecture air-conditioned hotel. And my little grandma got the gig to do the entire interior of this 19,000 square foot lobby, for glass on the ocean side and glass on the side where the the street was with all the people coming in. So it was a big gig and an honor, but she was smart. She knew that if she were to put the plants that she grew in there, and she didn't have enough to fill that much space anyway, they wouldn't survive, because an interior then may have been air conditioned, but may not have had the right humidity. Certainly the lighting wasn't there. The watering didn't have planters that were, dynamic. It wasn't a greenhouse at all. So she knew that the plants wouldn't survive there. Well, that little key that she was given when the hotel opened was not only given to her, it was given to all the celebrities of the day that came down to open the hotel in the mid-50s. Anybody know who the Rat Pack were? Okay, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis, all these stars, they all got the key, and then my little grandmother. And the reason she got the key for the opening of the hotel is she did the interior with something that nobody had ever seen before anywhere. Fake plastic foliage coming in from China. In the 50s, that was new. That was really new. And it fooled people, but in a good way. I don't have to take care of that. I don't have to water it. What light? It's still going to look. So imagine if you had never seen it and then you see it. So that's the recognition. And this little key was cool, because if we went down there, my parents would bring me down there as a little boy, and we want to go out to dinner someplace and there's a big line outside. My grandma would show this little key. Come on in, ma'am, like we're big shots. That's what the key to the city allows you to do. So that's who taught me about plants, but in context, in the years that she was an innovator in a way, because she understood that something natural like that Monstera would not be there for very long.
She didn't want to just put a plant in a room for it to die. That's lovely.
Yeah. So there were pothos and ferns and other leaf things, some like that eventually. But it's just sort of a sign of the times of how things get around the world, in this case, plastic from China.
Absolutely.
And then followed by linen flowers. They did nice things there.
I think this gentleman has a question.
One thing that has struck me in the time that I've gotten into plants is tissue culture. And I know right now there's a really big boom of it, and a lot of it's coming in. Do you find it better that it's more accessible to people, or do you find it, it kind of digs at the bottom line in a way? Like, what's your opinion on that?
I think to begin with, I think it's a very fair question. Okay, so kudos to you for offering it. The answer is, for me, remember I told you I'd like to stay in my lane and be the hybridizer developer and not the grower or vendor. The fact is, lab-produced plants make things far more affordable. And it started with orchids. 30, 40 years ago, a Phalaenopsis specimen of an orchid could be hundreds of dollars back then. And now you can buy them on the roadside for 10. So that's because of the technology that allows that kind of mass production. But with the technology also advancing to where people are doing it in their bathrooms, not just in a professional lab, it means that you've got a lot of people who are starting off with inferior genetics and just making more and more of it to sell stuff. That I'm not so fond of. If you have a particularly special plant that has the genetics that, by producing it in a clonal form, will be a mirror image, not a mirror image, but the exact image of that particular plant, then you've made it affordable to people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford it because of the market entry price. Mm-hmm. So in a real sense, I think it has a lot of good to give, provided that it's like with computer data. You put junk data in, you get junk data out. You put junk genetics in, you get junk genetics out. So it's a qualified answer to say it's here to stay no matter what you and I think about it, but it's making it available at prices in big box stores that otherwise would have been unheard of a decade ago. So I think that that's the main benefit of it. And by the way, then, the genetics, don't undermine the genetics of a plant that happens to come out of a tissue culture lab. Because if it was good stuff that comes in and you have the exact equal, that truly is a clone. And in that sense, it is just as good as the first plant. They will grow slower. A big specimen plant takes a lot of time to grow from it. And when you grow it from not a seed, but from a cellular level, it takes a lot more time. And people see a little plant this big that could grow this big, but they're buying it this big and they're saying, oh, well, mine's not as growing as big as the other one. Well, yeah, you may not have enough years in it yet, but it's the same genetics that with the patience and time will do that under the right conditions. And I think that's the boon. It's getting those rare and unusual things into the hands of people who would have never been able either to access it or afford it. And I think that's great for the development. I think that people breeding with plants, whether they come from me or somebody else, is wonderful. It's a great hobby. I've loved it. And you're all here partly because you're smitten with it too in a certain way.
Kind of going off the back of that, you talk a lot about the difference between a plant that's surviving and one that's truly thriving. What does that specifically look like with anthuriums? Like, how do you pick the ones with good vigor? Like, what does that mean?
Well, it means, and I sort of alluded to it before, an anthurium flower, when it's of size, I'm not talking about the very first little flower on an immature plant that you're trying to push to become a mom. Don't do that.
Teen pregnancy.
No, don't do that. Don't do that. No, you got to be grown up. I'll cut away first several flowers till it's big enough to absorb the responsibility of propagation. But then when it's growing up, I could have anywhere from 100 to even 1,000 seeds from that one flower. And when you have that many, it's not practical to wait for every single one to germinate. So the selective breeding for vigor, which is what I believe you're referring to, is what I had started to mention. If I pick the plants that are not only what I'd like them to look like, but are the studs of the bunch, then I'm also selecting for vigor, which means that that same plant should be easier to grow. When I say good genetics, I don't mean it's only prettier. I mean it is something that's more advanced in terms of being able to sort of defend for itself because it's not the slowpoke.
Yeah.
It's not the runt of the litter. And so in that sense, am I giving every single seed an equal chance? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. My life's too short to go for trying to get the runts of the litter to survive.
Say you've got your big tray of 1,000 anthurium seedlings, and what does a good plant versus a bad one look like to you if you just got your tray out there?
Well, size matters.
Okay.
There's a phrase. And beyond there, it's the traits that are in it that you may not be able to see the actual adult form traits until it's a little bigger. But if it means that out of 1,000, I select 20 or 30 at most, and I grow them out maybe for another year in an individual pot, by the end of that second year, if I manage from that particular hybrid cross to find 2 or 3 that were really the standouts, those become the ones that I'll put to the next generation, which is, by the way, F1, F2, F8 stands for Philly, F-I-L-I. It's an expression of each generational one, but I might only select, less than that from 1,000 seedlings if that's what it takes and that's what I'm looking for. Now, because they're all hybrids and they came from, say, pretty parents, maybe one of those 2 looks more like this pretty parent and one looks like that pretty parent, but they're more robust. I've got 2 from the price of 1 from that one cross, but to follow that next F series line. So it's just a way to approach it over time with a method. And that's what I'm saying. A lot of people who just like to do their first pollination breed, it's not a method. It's let's see if I can get a berry on it. So, to take that generation after generation is where you can start to produce, have fun working with it, and hopefully not be something that looks remarkably like the plant that it came from, where you're just suddenly giving it a new name because you created it. You know what confusion that makes for the market? It's really not a very sound thing to do. You're proud of it. You want to put your name and identity behind it. You've grown it. But to put it out to market under a new name that it looks remarkably like its predecessor just confuses the buyer.
So how did you know when Michelle was ready for that name status?
Oh, well, good question. Market timing.
Okay.
Yeah, no, market timing, because Michelle existed for years and years before the first one was ever offered commercially to anybody.
Yeah.
Okay? So before that, it didn't really even need the name Michelle because nobody was buying it. It was, most of the people that I grew up with and still know, we don't sell each other plants. We might barter, trade, give away, share. Yeah. But, the price point where a lot of aroids, not just anthuriums, got to, kind of crazy.
Absolutely.
And in the talk I have coming up, I'll show the example of that from the Dutch tulip craze. Okay? Yes, sir. Hi, Vic. We've never met. We've talked on a phone, and he had a bad experience with importing too.
With regards to, hi, Mrs. Block. Did you get her permission before naming the plant after her?
No, I think I got a kiss though.
I know that Michelle has been patented, so it's important to protect your intellectual property. What's the difference between patenting and registering a cultivar? So that's one question.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Vic, by the way, is a doc, so we've talked about different things at different levels, but now he's talking about the commercial development of plants, patents versus, license protection. The plant world, it's not so much a patent like you're thinking of, with ownership that way, but there are laws that exist in basically three different areas. Europe's got one set, the US, and then China is its own world, called plant breeders' rights, PBR. And I profess that I don't know everything about plant breeders' rights, but that I've been educated very nicely with it by my business partner in this, who is a plant breeders' rights licensing attorney out of the Netherlands. By the way, the Netherlands and Holland has always been and still should be considered the epicenter for getting plants from anywhere from there, more roads to go anywhere else in the world. So even though I'm based in Miami, my business really would not be. It would be based strategically not too far from here. The name itself is protected in a way that you could do all the plant breeders' rights you'd like, and that's what attorneys do by setting it up legally. That's setting it up for basically the legal and right way to do it. Enforcement is a very different aspect of the legal consequence of it, and it just doesn't mean that every single plant that I see or the partner sees that has been exploited, which is what you're bringing up, in other cultures sometimes don't have as much respect for intellectual property, but plant breeders' rights do have parallel understandings throughout the world, and that's why a smart partner plant breeders' rights attorney who's familiar with that knows when something should be actually acted on for enforcement, or not to let something just run its own way and try to eat up whatever the plant breeder should have ownership of. So even when I work with some excellent growers in the US, here in Europe and Asia, any agreements that way are all of us working together because we rely on each other. If I'm there supplying the seeds, I have to make sure that the grower, who's very frequently the seller, will be able to successfully grow and sell, or the way we structure the agreements is I don't even get a royalty. I'm not selling them my seeds. I've never sold a seed to anybody. I've given people my seeds to work with. If they're honest, they do it and they make a good living. It means then that I'm going to make something too. And that means we all rely on each other. So if something came along where somebody is not either reporting a sale or using the name Michelle for something that is not from our authorized grower vendors, that would be an infringement that I would leave up to the partner to decide if they're going to do anything or not. But I try to keep myself away from that, otherwise I worry too much and that's not fun. Did that answer your question?
Yep.
Good. Hi.
I don't understand if you may not need to, but do you ever use plant growth hormones, so auxin, gibberellin, to accelerate a growth in a certain season?
I use one in particular, but it's not a plant, it's a root growth hormone, and it's called Hormondin is the brand name. Comes in 3 different concentrations called 1, 2, and 3. I use something called Hormondin 2. It's just a little white powder dust. There are other things that are growth retardants and things like that that slow things down, or compact size. I have those available, but I don't use them on these plants. I do it really just to try to jumpstart the roots, in particular when I'm going from a little seedling into a finished pot size or into a bigger pot size if it's a breeding plant. That's when I find it's been helpful, and it's not limited to anthuriums. I pretty much use it on everything. So It's generally been something that's safe, but I'm not going to tell you as a doctor, go ahead and eat it. But yeah, hormones do work with plants as you would think. And in this case, things that in particular stimulate the root growth hormone is for me more important, because that's really where the energy comes from. The leaf is photosynthesizing and it's growing, but what happens if you don't have the roots, it's done. So I give the roots as much of a push as I can, especially when they're starting small.
The anthuriums seem to have got a special place for these.
Mm-hmm. Anthuriums have always fascinated me because, and I'm going to have to sidetrack to talk about water quality to show an anthurium leaf to its potential. They're commonly known as velvet leaf anthuriums, which means with the right water, you're not putting the calcium salts or other things on it. It's something that's clean. And when you get a nice big leaf that has a velvety sheen to it, that got my eye when everything was green decades ago. When I could breed into that plant colors, which I found easier to introduce to what previously didn't have colors, and I'm coming up with red velvet and purple velvet. Who better than you Brits who have a king now should know that purple velvet is regal. These anthuriums, among other plants, I regard as being perhaps the most regal in appearance because of that purple velvet look. As well as that, it grows, as I said, at least semi-epiphytically. It grows up off the ground. And yet I started with bromeliads years ago, which are the epitome of epiphytes. If you learn how to grow epiphytically, then a lot of other plants will evolve and that are easier to understand, that they really do like to go up and seek that sun, light, water, everything that they're looking for, rather than staying down under the jungle forest floor, where if anybody's really been in a real jungle, you'll be it's remarkable how few plants are actually living on the floor of the jungle. I mean, a lot of fungi and other things that decompose in leaf litter, but the actual plants are always racing to the top. And the anthuriums are no exception. I have what's called a living wall in my conservatory. It's about 8 feet high. And I have potted anthuriums that I put on the ground of it decades ago that are all the way up to the top of 8 feet. So think how long that takes. But that's their nature. And so along with their nature of expressing that velvety sheen, I think that purple velvet's a pretty regal example of a plant among other plants. I don't see that in my palms, bromeliads, orchids, and I've got a blue oil fern, which is kind of reflective, but the colors are what I see. And years ago, I had a detachment. This eye's blind, this eye sees color and focuses. So I'm doing what I can with what engages me to the plant world, and I do like purple velvet.
Kind of going off that, you were talking about how they like growing up. Would you then recommend us giving our anthuriums support in the form of something to climb up, cork bark, moss pole, something like that? Because I know a lot of people just grow them straight in a pot. Mm-hmm. Would you suggest giving them something to climb?
There's only a few of the anthuriums that would like to climb. Okay. I'm not going to name each of them now, because most of my breeding for that velvety sheen with the veins patterns come from Anthurium magnificum and Anthurium crystallinum. Mm-hmm. I do have others that I've worked with, some of which are more aggressive climbers, but for the most part, no. When I work with the plants I work with, I find that a well-rooted plant can support itself. The growing point will get thicker and thicker. You've got a root system there. Then it's time for me to put it into a little bigger pot. So the fact is, you can get larger and larger leaves depending on how big that pot is. You leave it in a little, 9-centimeter pot, and maybe it'll get to be about that big, but you put it into a 17 or 20, and now you get something that's this big. There's a maximum size to that, as well as the weight you want to carry around with the plant and the space it takes. But if you're fortunate enough to have something you really like, before you try to propagate it and stuff, the larger that plant becomes, the more likely it is to tolerate the stresses of breeding. When you cause a plant to reproduce, or a person, it's very stressful on the mom. And so the more you're starting with, chances are the better. So my breeding plants, and I've entered lots of plants for show competitions, for years and years, and I didn't necessarily need this award either. It's nice to be recognized, but my cabinets are full of crystal and ribbons. Don't need another one. However, my breeding plants don't have to have every single leaf being perfect to enter it in the show. They're not. And yet, if they get so stressed to where the plant's starting to decline because of propagating with it, I put them on sabbatical. And yeah, not just bed rest, but even cut the flowers away. So it doesn't put any energy into not just getting pollinated, but don't let it worry about that. The flower itself is not there really to primarily photosynthesize. It's a fascinating flower. Everybody knows it changes from a female receptive stage and then only later then produces the pollen, which really makes it impossible for that same flower to pollinate itself. The timing's off. So instead, I'll use either other plants, or I always, for all my breeding plants, I have no less than 2 of the same plant. Then I just increase the odds that one or the other will be at a certain stage, or I'll even sometimes take the pollen away and keep it dry in a little sealed bag, put it in a freezer, and take it out for a few weeks later. So these are all little tips, but I think the best tip to successfully propagating something that you like with itself to make more of what you like is start off doing a division so you have 2 plants and your odds will go right up.
It sounds like most of your work is through selective breeding to make your new hybrids. I know there are some labs that do things like irradiating seeds to try and get interesting new mutations. Are you a purist? Do you think there's something special about the kind of selective breeding that you do? What's your opinion on those?
Hell no. No, I don't irradiate things because I'm more worried about mutations happening to me. So no, but you say mutations. Realize that genetics are what, when you think about nature, the word nature. My company name is actually Nurturing Nature, okay, because that's what we're doing. But the nature part is really our DNA that we're born with. But what happens that produces mutations, not necessarily through irradiating or other chemicals, are called epigenetics. Those things that happen to a living thing, it happens to all of us too. You're not the same person that you were born. All the viruses you ever had remain in your genome and get passed on. So understand that plants go through the same development. Sometimes a genetic change will be looked at and say, oh, that's a mutant. And some mutants are beautiful, other ones are not successful with life, just like with people. So when you realize that epigenetics happens and people try to say, oh no, look, this plant that I bought is that, it's turned into something else. Yeah, it happens. That's living. That's life. So don't think that something stays exactly like a photograph, or if people send me a picture and they say, what's this plant? And they send me one photograph of one leaf at one moment in time. It hasn't evolved to its full potential, and then I'm not seeing the whole plant. So it makes it nearly impossible to differentiate between a mutant or an epigenetic change, favorable or not. But from the time that plant germinates, it's subject to having other things influence it to create through epigenetics something that you didn't think was going to happen. Sometimes they're fascinating. Sometimes they're really dogs. I mean, ugly.
So if you take a Michelle that's come out of lab with a Michelle that's also come out of lab and end up crossbreeding them, is that a Michelle crossed Michelle or a Michelle crossed self?
I call it a self-cross. If you're starting with 2 different plants, they each bring their own genetics to it. They happen to be the same. It's inbreeding. That's all it is. Okay. Yeah. So, there's plenty of good examples throughout history, including royalty, what happens when you inbreed. And they're not always pretty.
Are there any issues with inbreeding, like if you did take 2 Michelles and breed them together and together and together again down the line, would that cause issues in place the same way they would in humans?
It depends if the breeding is done with things that have genes that are favorable or not. So, I mean, you've seen pictures of the royalty where the chins are like out to here, right? From inbreeding of people. You can draw the same things. At a certain point, that becomes so big you can't chew food, and so other things. So, inbreeding genetics, I'm very much a fan of Darwin. all factors into this. To answer your question succinctly, it would still be a cross on itself, you know, which is not necessarily bad, but you're not likely at that point to refine the genetics that much more. You may, by the virtue of the fact of epigenetics that happens to each of those plants before you breed with them, discover new things because it wasn't what the plant was born with, it was what they evolved to get to the stage where they could breed, and then reveal things that would be unexpected. Did that last part connect with you?
Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
good, because I think that's important. People expect that the consistency will be there, but seed hybridizing brings both parents together, mixes up those genes, and then spits out stuff. Michelle and I have twin boys. If you ever saw how different they are, she's from Jamaica, okay? Brings a whole different hybrid to the situation. For me, East European, but both our families wound out together, and we made some pretty babies together, but they don't look a bit alike. Yeah.
Yeah, I never considered epigenetics as part of
Yeah, it's the reason I wanted to follow it through with that, because whatever you're going to do from the moment that hatchling has grown up, whether from a cell or a seed, you have epigenetic impact on it.
Interesting.
Okay, so anyway, there's the title, Healthy Respect for the Powers of Plants and the Incredible Ways They Engage Us. And I sort of alluded to this in the beginning. There's a typical plant, and I'm not going to try to keep this talk confined to anthuriums at all, the rest of this, so just hold on. This is a statement that I wrote this way because of roots, and I talked about how important they are. But what do roots do to a plant that's different than us? Okay, a storm comes, famine, we know how to get the hell out of there and go to a place where we can survive. Plants can't do that. They're rooted. They can't escape those threats. So the plants have evolved remarkably sophisticated strategies to engage their surroundings in ways that ensure their survival and ultimate reproduction. That's the really big message here to looking at how the plants are engaging us. And there's a little germinated seed. Okay, I took this close-up picture because I wanted people to see germination. Now, it's a really cool thing. Don't know exactly how or why it happens. We're glad it does. A taproot grows down, a little leaf grows up. But look at that taproot. You see those little white hairs on it? I don't care how sensitive and delicate you are, those little feeling hairs are going to get damaged. Feeling points of a root system don't only look for water. There are electromagnetic ways that they're communicating to feel their environment. Spacers, oxygen, all different things happen. And so I'm pointing out that even an anthurium seed, what's going on under the ground, the roots are more important than what happens above. So if we're going to look at the way plants engage us, let's look at the senses a moment, okay? And we'll start off with the top on feel, because obviously you have some plants, this is called the zombia palm, that has these spines, but it allows the weaving underneath to stay perfect because there's no critters that are climbing up and down the trunks of these palms. This is in our front yard. Other feel for things, nail file plant, cordia, it's got a leaf that's almost like sandpaper feel. They can use it for nail files, and the tree we have outside on the left is an example of that. This is perhaps the most soft velvety leaf I've ever felt, and you feel it and you almost smile. Something could be almost impossibly soft. But I want to move on then to sight, because this is when you look at the anthurium or other plants that the sight means everything. So how about that for a plant? That's called a Persian carpet flower. I do grow this at home. It's only about 4 inches across, but you wonder what an insect sees in that, and that the plant evolved this. It must be the sexiest thing. Let me at you, because you know that's it. And even on a close-up, look at that little cup thing. That's what an insect's focusing on. Think about how ingenious of the plant is it that it can attract the pollinator to ensure this plant's survival. As beautiful as it is, got nothing to do with us. There's a good-looking plant. Okay, now tulip mania. 400 or so years ago, 1637. This was actually the drawing from a Dutch catalog of a tulip that was so famous and so expensive, too, that it got its own name, the Viceroy. Pretty regal sounding just there. That particular bulb, when it came out, was worth so much that it would take a skilled worker 10 years' salary. So things sometimes got to be crazy, and then when the bottom fell out of that market, and mind you, the Dutch in these years had a lot of money. They'd come back from, the New World and all the exploration there. So Dutch has always have been really big with tulips. They were looking for the blackest, darkest, it's almost like a deep, dark purple color petal. And then, some of them came out with this variegation in the petal. And that became, as they say, the cat's meow. That became the real most expensive thing you could ever have. And people who were the collectors couldn't keep their hands off of it until the bottom fell out of the market, and then they were left holding things that were relatively worthless to their investment. Keep that in mind. And here's one more point I'll bring up about this that was only discovered a few years ago. The cause of that variegation was from a mosaic virus. Does that give you any message for beware? It's also the reason you won't find any variegated plants in my breeding collection, because I don't need to spread a virus, as pretty as you might think variegated things are, to everything I have. So if you like them, enjoy them, but understand what causes it. Mutations frequently can come from viruses. All right. Taste. Yeah, there's one. And what do you think of taste? Well, anybody know what that plant is? Very good, very good. Not many people know that horseradish is there. Horseradish is particularly bitter. Okay, now plants produce chemicals called alkaloids that taste bitter because animals don't like eating bitter plants. So it's a defense for many plants that have that flavor. But I also wanted to show this. Here's a lemur happily eating a fruit. Now, the plant can't pick up its own seed and throw it someplace else. Ferns before the flowering plants, of course, had ways that the wind could be a vector to carry a spore someplace else that was favorable. But when animals came, plants had flowers that produced fruits because animals like to eat fruits. They defecate the seed somewhere else, and now the same plant that couldn't walk to someplace else is growing someplace else. That's pretty smart on the part of the plant, don't you think? We grow this. These are called miracle fruit, little berries on a bush from West Africa that actually will change your receptor-guided taste buds so that you will perceive things that are sour as sweet. So you eat a lemon after having one of these, it'll taste like a lemon candy or lime. Very interesting. Everybody smiles when they do that because unlike the bitter side, sweet is perceived as something nice and happy. And there's even patients who have had different procedures done around this part of the body with radiation, the ciliary nerve, when you lose your sense of smell. And that happened a lot during COVID too. Certain times that you can finally perceive a certain taste, like this sweet, it's a very pleasant thing and can be used for therapeutic purpose. So, moving on. This is actually a pretty interesting topic because when we were in China last month, Michelle and I, and we were giving this same talk. And somebody stood up, and a nice young girl, and said, I like to play music to my plants. Does it help? Now think about it a minute. It's a really sincere question. You hear a lot of people, I'll tell you, we paid baby Mozart when Michelle was pregnant, just wondering what's happening inside. But there really is very little evidence to say that playing music will help your plant grow up better. However, with hearing, you can actually play a 200 hertz frequency in a cornfield at 220, and it will grow towards that direction. You can plant chili with fennel next to it, and you'll see them communicating and getting together. So my point about hearing is, if you're looking at the way plants are engaging you through hearing, stop thinking about things like, oh, we grow bamboo, and they make the nice wooden sound when bamboo hits bamboo. Plants don't communicate the way that we're thinking about when I'm speaking and the sound's traveling, you're hearing it in your ears. No. Plants do their communicating underground in the roots. And that's the reason I wanted to go back to the importance of roots. This is another fascinating picture. These are trees that are growing all of the same species, but these are different trees, different trunks if you see down there. So here's plants communicating not through their roots, but they're each taking their own respective space so one doesn't overgrow the next. It's called crown shyness. I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, you learned something
I
there?
think it's so cool.
Yeah, okay. So plants do communicate in ways that we really are just starting to understand, especially the root systems. And that's why you'll have natural groupings in the wild of certain plants which grow well next to others. And yet those same groups you'll find elsewhere where other plant species are not part of that community. It's just like people above ground. Who do you want to have as your neighbors and who don't you? Plants do that all by themselves. Smell. Okay, well, here's a good one for anybody who's had the chance to smell a rose or an amorphophallus. Anybody ever, the stinky corpse plants stuff? Obviously different pollinators, different ways that smells engage, but this is the plant engaging us or a pollinator. Plants have to do that because they can't just go out and put a sign up, fertilize me, right? So anyway, I'm going to just basically tell you about some of these smells because some of those smells are in different things. You have linalool, which is basically lavender. It's calming and a little sedating, but it's mostly a calming effect. That's why you find it in bath soaps and things like that. A little steam activates it. How about citrus? When you go to the grocery store and you walk down that aisle with detergents and everything is citrus lemony fresh. Or as they do or when you fly over here and they give you a warm towel scented with lemon. It could be the dirtiest towel ever, but it gives you the perception that it's clean. Okay, and that's what those do there. This is a really interesting scent because this is the most common fragrance in nature, otherwise called a terpene. Okay, terpenes are how plants share their smells. Okay, this is the most prevalent terpene in nature. And again, if you go to Asia, where we've just come back from, the Japanese have a tradition called shirin-yoku. It's forest bathing. Why do you think a walk in the park or in a pine forest is clearing for your mind and your body? Why do you feel different? Is it just the fresh air? Not only, it's the smells. And that's why I wanted to bring this part up with the way plants engage you through olfactory smells. Anyway, I'm not going to go too much into the next, but there is a sixth sense going on. And obviously plants have figured a way to get into our minds also. This is belladonna, angel's trumpets, datura, other names for it. I grow this. This is our plant at night. You walk under this at night. It's a beautiful floral, almost intoxicating. It's not going to throw you for a loop. But if you actually took the active alkaloid in there and you dried it and produced it, and it turns into something called scopolamine. Atropine's another example of it, and it can sort of scramble the brain. He's shaking his head. He must know something about that then. Ever tried it?
I mean about that, because the Victorians used to do it. They used to shake it over their tea.
Mm-hmm.
They'd have more interesting conversations.
Yeah, and it's not only that, but even they said that Cleopatra used to do it. It was a sign, dilated pupils, a sign of beauty from that. So there are a lot of things that happen that aren't limited only to the mind. I wanted to show this because these are classic botanical prints of several plants that are known to impact the mind. And starting up top, we talked about cannabis before just very briefly, that I'd been published in that space. But look at the two off to the right. There's the opium poppy and cocaine, which is used by people in where it's indigenous to, Peru, Bolivia, high altitudes. What the cocaine does in dilute teas is it actually acts like coffee does for us here. It's a bit of a stimulant, but in dose. And that's the key point. The dose defines this in ways that I'll show you in a moment. The bottom middle is tobacco. That's a New World plant. Cannabis is an Old World plant. That plant in the bottom middle is responsible for more preventable deaths around the world by far than any other plant, including the opioids and fentanyl and all that you hear about it. But it's all the plant chemicals. This one works with nicotine receptors. And, people have different ways of taking it in. Obviously, smoking releases more chemicals than simply what's in tobacco. And that's part of the scourge with cancers. But the two on the left side, there's coffee and chocolate, both of which we grow in our backyard. And if you don't think those can get in your mind and become dependent forming, they do. They do, right? Yeah. Okay. So the point is, I'm showing you the way plants engage us, whether wittingly or not. that gives you a classic example. I mean, I don't think any of those prints is less than a couple hundred of years old, but it's really just sort of a good way to wrap up this second half of the talk, which is how plants engage us. And this quote, from anything medical, I want you to know I'm a physician, but remember, I said anesthesiologists are clinical pharmacists and physiologists, and this is the father of toxicology, a branch of pharmacology, where it said that the dose defines a poison. I could give you too much water, even too much oxygen, and you could get very sick or die. So keep that in mind with anything that I've said about how plants engage the mind. And that's it.
I think I just have one more that I think might be a good way to end this out. Are we going to be seeing more Doc Block anthuriums in the UK soon?
Are we? No, this is actually an important point. I told you I came here first to London in 1978. I had a webmaster for several years who was from Sheffield. So it's not like I don't want to be here. I do follow some social media myself. So I've just met Emma, but you have other celebrities and people might be right here today who are a part of this. So I've wanted to be here, but the original way I thought of bringing my plants globally was to have certain confined zones. So Canada, US was going to be one. I defined another as Europe. Third is Asia. Then I realized, as a person interested in the business, that even just looking at Asia, the business dynamics in a communist versus non-communist country are very different, okay? You can put stuff in, money in, but it's harder to get out. Well, Brexit sort of redefined Europe. So I would like to say that I'm as well represented throughout Europe, but the weakest presence was right here, which is why I'm glad to be right here. And thanks to Jacob, it looks like there will be more things, as he will tell you if you want to add something to this. You're our host.
Things like Michelle and other hybrids we have growing on right now. So hopefully over the next 6, 12 months, 2 years, there'll be more and more things coming. So, and I'm still hybridizing. I mean, don't think I've stopped doing it. I just don't have to turn out 5 a year or something. But at least that business partner in the Netherlands says, "Can you please keep giving 1 or 2 a year is good." And because I haven't,
Michelle says the new ones are beautiful.
She's saying the new ones, but the fact is, if you remember, I said earlier in the talk that I don't release any plants that I'm not already 2 full generations, meaning those F. generations ahead on. And that's strategic, because I know there'll be copycat imposters, including those renamed by unscrupulous vendors. This is not an unscrupulous vendor. So what you see is what you get. There is more coming. Just be patient, because it's not that I don't have it already, but I don't need to release everything so suddenly for somebody else to exploit in another place of the world where the respect for plant breeders' rights may not be what you have here.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Let's have a big round of applause.
Thank you.